You ever stop and think about how life just throws these curveballs, these situations where two things seem true, but they just can't possibly be true at the same time?
Oh, absolutely.
Doesn't matter who you are, right? Student, CEO, whatever, we all hit these contradictions, little ironies baked into being human.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that a lot of these aren't just, random glitches.
Okay.
They often come directly from us, from our consciousness, the societies we build, how we try to make sense of a reality that, well, often resists simple answers. We call them human-made paradoxes.
Human-made paradoxes. Okay, let's dig into this. So for this deep dive, we're looking at some really fascinating sources exploring these very things. The goal, to get a clearer picture maybe of where they originate, how they affect us, and maybe even how we navigate them without getting totally tangled up.
Right. Think of it as becoming well-informed on something complex, but without the years of philosophy homework.
Yeah, exactly. A shortcut to sounding smart at parties. So what kinds are we covering?
Well, drawing on the research, we'll hit a few key areas. There are the classic philosophical ones, the brain busters.
Right.
Then the psychological ones, the stuff happening inside our own heads, societal paradoxes that are kind of woven into how we live together, and even the really modern ones popping up because of tech and globalization.
Okay, give me an example. Like what?
Well, think about that huge one. Free will versus determinism.
Yeah.
Do we actually choose, or is it all laid out?
Ah, yes. The age-old question.
Or like the paradox of progress, how sometimes the more advanced we get as a society, the more, anxious we seem to become.
Definitely feel that one.
We'll even look at how being online all the time, this digital observer effect, might be changing us.
Okay. And there's a kind of paradox right here, isn't there? Us using AI, this super logical system, to try and understand these very human, often illogical, emotional paradoxes.
Precisely. It's a meta-paradox right out of the gate. Shows the potential, but also, the limits of using AI for this.
All right, so where do we start? Where did these things even come from?
Well, if you want to trace the formal thinking, you really have to go back to ancient philosophy.
Okay, the Greeks and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And those early thinkers, they weren't just playing games. They hit upon fundamental questions that led straight to paradoxes we still wrestle with today. And these weren't just abstract puzzles. They actually forced people to rethink basic ideas about knowledge and truth.
Like which ones? What are the classics?
Okay, so you've got the liar paradox. This statement is false.
Right. If it's true, it's false. If it's false, it's true. My head hurts already.
Exactly. It messes with our whole concept of truth and self-reference. The key thing there is how one simple sentence can just blow up our assumptions about logic.
Okay, what else?
Then there's Zeno's paradoxes. The famous one is Achilles and the tortoise.
The race Achilles can never win.
Right. If the tortoise gets a head start, Achilles keeps reaching where the tortoise was, but the tortoise has already moved a tiny bit further. Logically, he never catches up. It really highlights how weird infinity is, and how our gut feeling about motion doesn't always match the logic.
Still bends my brain.
And then one more classic, the Sorites paradox. The paradox of the heap.
Okay.
Imagine a heap of sand. Take away one grain. Still a heap, right?
Yeah.
Keep doing that. At what exact grain does it stop being a heap?
Yeah. There's no clear line.
Exactly. It shows how fuzzy our language is, how we make categories, but the edges are blurry. Even seemingly solid concepts aren't always so solid.
So these weren't just intellectual exercises, they had real impact.
Oh, absolutely. And building on these, later thinkers came up with self-referential paradoxes that really shook the foundations. Like Russell's paradox, in set theory, does the set of all sets that don't contain themselves contain itself?
Whoa, okay, wait, say that again?
Yeah, it's a mind bender. Or Bartrari's paradox, if you call something unnameable. Haven't you just named it?
Yeah.
And the Grelling-Nelson paradox about words that don't describe themselves. These things exposed really deep inconsistencies in the logical systems people had built. The takeaway is that our attempts to create perfect systems can kind of reveal their own flaws through their own rules.
Okay, so that's the philosophical side, but you said they pop up in our own minds too.
Exactly. It's not just abstract logic. Paradoxes bubble up right from our psychology, our consciousness. A big one is the paradox of self-consciousness.
How is being self-conscious a paradox? Seems pretty straightforward.
Well, think about it. Our ability to think about ourselves, that self-conscious thought, seems really tied up with language, especially the word I.
Okay, makes sense.
But then, how did we get self-conscious before we had language to think I? It's a bit circular, right? Which came first?
Chicken and egg?
Kind of. Some philosophers, like Bermudez, suggest maybe there's a more basic pre-linguistic self-awareness rooted in just, being a body in the world. So the I comes later, built on that foundation.
Interesting. So the feeling of me might be more basic than the thought me?
Possibly. And then, of course, the big one we mentioned, free will versus determinism.
Right. The ultimate are we in control question.
Exactly. Our gut feeling, our whole experience screams, I choose. But then science and philosophy present these really strong arguments that everything is just cause and effect. Genes, environment, brain chemistry, it all just leads to the next moment.
So are we puppets or pilots?
Well, Robert Trundle put it nicely, saying our nature is paradoxically characterized by limitedly having and not having free will. And neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky basically argues free will, as in a total uncaused choice, is probably an illusion. The paradox is that clash between how it feels to live and what science suggests might be happening.
That's a heavy one. What are the ripple effects of that?
Huge. It impacts everything. Ethics, responsibility, the legal system, how we even see ourselves. If we're not really choosing, what does blame mean? What does praise mean? It's a core human-made paradox with massive implications.
Okay, so paradoxes in logic, paradoxes in our heads. What about when we get together in society?
Oh, absolutely. Societies, just by trying to organize things, trying to make progress, trying to create meaning, they inevitably cook up their own paradoxes. The paradox of progress is a great example.
Progress causing problems. Yeah, that sounds depressingly familiar.
It's the idea that even as things get better materially, technologically, we can paradoxically end up with new kinds of stress, anxiety, or totally unforeseen issues.
Like what?
Think about the revolution of rising expectations. Things improve, but our expectations shoot up even faster, so we don't actually feel happier.
Right, the goalposts keep moving.
In the hedonic treadmill, we adapt to good things, so our happiness baseline kind of stays put. The main point is progress in one area doesn't guarantee overall well-being and can even create new headaches.
So more stuff doesn't equal more happiness.
Pretty much. Greg Easterbrook wrote a whole book on it, The Progress Paradox. Despite massive gains in living standards in the West, happiness levels haven't really budged. But things like depression seem more common. Even intelligence reports, like the National Intelligence Council's Global Trends, point this out. The modern world has more opportunity, but also, potentially, more danger than ever before, thanks to our own advancements.
That's a tough one to wrap your head around. What other societal paradoxes are out there?
Well, there's the paradox of choice, sometimes called the paradox of freedom. We usually think more options, more freedom, more happiness, right?
Seems logical. More choice is good.
But paradoxically, having too many choices can actually make us less satisfied, stressed out, even paralyzed, unable to choose at all.
Ah, the agony of picking a Netflix show.
Exactly. As one source put it, the more choices we have, the less satisfied we are with each one. Mark Manson talks about this too. Freedom is nice, but real meaning often comes from committing to something, which means giving up other options.
Interesting.
And society-wide, there's the idea that totally unlimited freedom could actually allow the powerful to oppress the weak, ultimately reducing freedom for many. The key idea, more isn't always better, too many choices can backfire.
So too much freedom can be not freeing.
Kind of, yeah. Then you've got the empowerment paradox, especially relevant in talks about gender equality.
Okay.
We see policies and talk about empowering women, which is great. But often, there are still these deep-seated systemic barriers and conflicting expectations. Women might be told to be empowered, but the system they're in hasn't fully caught up.
Right, the rhetoric versus the reality.
Exactly. There's a disconnect. The insight is that stated goals don't always match the underlying structures.
That sounds incredibly frustrating.
It can be. And one more. The paradox of universalism.
Universalism, like universal values.
Yeah. The idea is, to achieve something truly universal like justice or understanding, we often need to really recognize and deal with the specific experiences of different groups. Just taking one group's view and calling it universal, that's false universalism.
So you can't just smooth over the differences.
Right. True universality seems to require acknowledging particularity, what some call polycentric recognition. The paradox is that getting truly universal means getting really specific first.
Okay, I think I get that. To understand everyone, you need to understand the different everyones.
That's a good way to put it.
So it's clear these aren't just old philosophical puzzles. We're actively creating new paradoxes right now, aren't we?
Oh, definitely. It's an ongoing process. Modern life, with its rapid changes, is a real paradox factory.
Driven by technology, I imagine.
Largely, yes. Those technologically driven paradoxes are everywhere. Remember that paradox of progress report? It lays out how tech advancements, IT, AI, biotech, bring amazing opportunities, but also huge new risks.
Like job losses from automation.
Exactly. Job displacement, privacy evaporating because of data collection, tricky ethical questions about AI making decisions, or gene editing, new security threats. The point is, tech is always a double-edged sword, benefits and brand new challenges side by side.
Feels like we're constantly playing catch-up with our own creations.
It does feel that way sometimes. Then you have globalization paradoxes. We're more connected than ever: trade, travel, communication. Great in many ways. But it's also linked to rising cultural anxiety, nationalism, polarization.
Yeah, you see that everywhere.
And ironically, the easy flow of information can actually create echo chambers and help misinformation spread like wildfire, making it harder to find common ground. So more connection doesn't automatically mean more harmony.
It seems almost the opposite sometimes.
It can feel like it. And then there's this digital version of the observer effect.
How does that work online?
Well, in science, observing changes the thing observed, right? Online, with social media, constant tracking, knowing we might be watched or even just constantly watching ourselves, can actually shape how we see ourselves, how we act. Our online persona might drift pretty far from our actual offline self.
So we're performing, even subconsciously.
It can feel like that. The awareness of being observed changes the behavior. These modern paradoxes really show our knack for creating contradictions is alive and well.
But hearing all this, are paradoxes just like bad news? They sound incredibly frustrating.
That's a really crucial question. They can be frustrating, absolutely. But they're not just flaws or errors. Looking back, the appearance of paradoxes seems to be a major engine for growth, intellectual growth, societal change, even evolution.
How so? Like the frustration pushes us.
Exactly, that discomfort, that feeling of inconsistency, that, wait, this doesn't add up. That's often what forces us to question assumptions, to innovate, to find a more nuanced way of looking at things.
Well, they're like cosmic puzzles nudging us to level up our thinking.
That's a great analogy. Think how ancient logic paradoxes pushed advancements in math and logic. How the free will debate keeps fueling research into what it means to be human. How the paradox of progress forces us to question our economic models.
Right.
As one source put it, uncovering paradoxes is pivotal in reshaping the foundations of our thought processes. They're not just bugs. They're often features that drive development. AI could be useful here, not by solving them, but maybe helping us spot them and understand their dynamics better.
Okay, so to kind of organize all this, you mentioned different categories.
Yeah, we can group them roughly. You've got logical semantic ones about language and logic itself, like the liar paradox.
Got it.
Epistemological paradoxes about the limits of our knowledge, how observing changes things.
Like the observer effect.
Right. Psychological existential ones wrestling with things like free will or happiness inside ourselves. Socioeconomic paradoxes arising from society and money, like the paradox of progress.
Yeah.
Ethical moral paradoxes challenging our ideas of right and wrong, and cultural universalist ones, that tension between universal ideals and diverse realities. It just helps see how widespread these things are.
Okay, so these paradoxes aren't just abstract concepts floating around. How do they actually land for us personally? How do we experience them?
Yeah, this is where it gets really personal, right? Because they don't just stay out there. They impact how we think, how we feel, even our biology and behavior. Running into a paradox is a very human thing, often involving this internal tug of war.
So what's happening in our brains when we hit one of these contradictions?
Well, a key idea is cognitive dissonance. You know that uncomfortable feeling when you hold two conflicting beliefs? Or when you do something that goes against your values?
Oh, yeah. Definitely know that feeling.
That's dissonance. Leon Festinger's theory is basically that we hate that feeling and are really motivated to get rid of it.
How do we usually do that? Try to make it go away.
We try a few things. Maybe change one of the beliefs so they match up, or we justify the action, find reasons why it was okay after all, or sometimes we just kind of ignore the information that's causing the conflict.
Like pretending it's not there.
Exactly. The meat paradox is a good example. People who like eating meat but also care about animals feel this tension. They might resolve it by deciding animals don't really suffer, or finding health justifications, or just not thinking about it too much. The point is, paradoxes often create this internal stress that pushes us to find relief somehow.
So these big societal or philosophical paradoxes can actually create that same kind of friction inside us.
For sure. When you encounter something like the clash between privacy and security, or even a personal one like loving and resenting a relative at the same time, it triggers that dissonance. And that feeling drives us to find some kind of resolution, maybe adjust our view, change behavior, or sometimes, use less healthy coping mechanisms. Understanding that link is key. If AI is ever going to help, it need to recognize those patterns of conflict and resolution.
It sounds exhausting just thinking about all these contradictions.
It really can be. Which brings us to things like ambiguity tolerance and cognitive load.
Okay.
How well we handle paradox depends partly on how comfortable we are with things being unclear, messy, ambiguous. That's ambiguity tolerance. And paradoxes, being inherently messy, put a real strain on our cognitive load, basically. How much information our brain can juggle at once.
So too much uncertainty can kind of overload the system.
Exactly. Our processing power is finite. When we hit overload from too much complexity or contradiction, we might just freeze up. Or get angry if it clashes with what we believe. Or just go passive, follow the herd to avoid the mental effort. It can be stressful, make us feel less competent. The key thing is our mental limits shape how we react.
Like a mental circuit breaker trips.
Sort of, yeah. And here's another twist. Our ability to concentrate, to really focus, is itself a bit of a cognitive paradox. We need that focus to tackle complex things like paradoxes, but our brains aren't really built for perfect, sustained attention.
So we need focus to understand paradox, but paradox makes it hard to focus.
You got it. It's a meta-paradox. We need the cognitive tools, but the very things we're trying to understand can overload those tools. Which makes you wonder about that idea of AI just making us feel good all the time. Confronting these deep contradictions might just inherently push our cognitive limits.
And does just observing these things in ourselves change anything?
Absolutely. That observer effect we talked about, it applies to ourselves too. When we turn our attention inward, observe our own thoughts and feelings, that active observation can subtly change them.
How?
Well, in social situations, knowing you're watched changes how you act. That's the Hawthorne effect. Internally, it creates maybe a paradox of self-aware individuality. The act of becoming aware of yourself, reflecting on what makes you you, can shift the very you you're observing. Self-awareness isn't passive. It actively shapes what it sees.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about the intellectual puzzle. It's deeply emotional, too.
Or completely. Dealing with paradox isn't just a head game. It triggers a whole range of emotions. And these feelings aren't just noise. They're part of how we experience and try to deal with the contradictions.
What kind of emotions are we talking about?
You name it: joy, sorrow, anger, fear. Even happiness gets complicated.
Yeah.
Emotions are generally seen as adaptive responses.
Yeah.
Right? Helping us deal with challenges and opportunities. So things like uncertainty, injustice, existential threats, which are often tied up with paradoxes, naturally stir up feelings. Think about agentic anger, that righteous frustration that can actually motivate you to act against something you see as wrong or risky. It can even exist alongside positive feelings, strangely enough. The point is, emotions give us information and drive our responses.
So anger isn't always bad. It can be useful.
It certainly can serve a purpose. On the flip side, constantly suppressing emotions, especially negative ones like anger, can actually backfire, maybe even dulling positive feelings like joy.
Interesting.
Real emotional maturity might involve being able to hold conflicting feelings at once, like loving someone while also being frustrated by them. Existential positive psychology talks about embracing these dualities, light and dark, good and bad, suggesting true well-being comes from integrating both.
So maybe chasing only happiness isn't the answer.
Well, that leads us right to the happiness paradox. We assume trying hard to be happy makes you happier. But research suggests it can sometimes do the opposite.
Really?
Maybe because the constant effort drains our mental resources. The key insight is, directly chasing happiness might be less effective than focusing on other things, like finding meaning or purpose.
So stop trying so hard to be happy, and you might actually get happier. Another paradox.
Exactly. Maybe focusing on meaning, purpose, accepting the ups and downs of life is a better path. The emotions paradoxes bring up frustration, anger, sadness. They're signals. Frustration might mean cognitive overload. Anger might point to injustice. Sorrow to a loss of meaning. So if AI is going to help, it should help us understand these signals, not just try to switch them off.
It also sounds like our individual biology must play a part in how we each handle these paradoxes differently.
Oh, absolutely. Our biology, our genetics, they're a huge piece of the puzzle. The fact that all humans are different starts right there. Our genes influence so much personality, how we think, even our susceptibility to mental health issues. There's usually not one gene, but lots of them interacting in complex ways. So yeah, our biology shapes our unique response to paradox.
So we're literally wired differently when it comes to dealing with contradictions.
In many ways, yes. And it's not just genes alone. It's how our genes interact with our environment. Our predispositions might lead us into certain situations, which then reinforce those traits, influencing how we cope with paradoxes. It's super intricate. You even see statistical quirks like Simpson's paradox in the data, where a trend in a whole group can actually reverse when you look at subgroups. It just reminds us to be careful about oversimplifying.
So what happens biologically or physically when we really struggle with these deep existential paradoxes?
Well, getting stuck wrestling with unresolved paradoxes about meaning or freedom can lead to what people call existential crises. And that can have real health consequences. More anxiety, stress, depression, even higher risk of substance issues. Sleep gets disrupted. Life satisfaction can drop. Even just the cognitive overload from constantly trying to juggle contradictions can increase stress, make it harder to feel joy or function day to day. There's even research linking a persistent scarcity mindset, which can stem from existential anxiety to higher rates of depression. It really shows there's no single human response. Any helpful AI would need to be personalized, ethically aware of these individual differences.
It feels like even our struggles, our vices maybe, are tangled up in how we try to cope with all this paradoxical stuff.
That's a really sharp insight. Often, what we call vices or maladaptive behaviors aren't just random failings. They can be deeply connected to how we try to manage the discomfort, the feeling of meaninglessness that paradoxes can stir up.
How does that work? Give me an example.
We'll take substance use. Increasingly, addiction is seen partly as a way to cope with deep existential distress, anxiety about meaning, loneliness, death, freedom, guilt, control.
So like self-medication for existential dread.
In a way, yeah. The substance or behavior becomes a temporary escape, a substitute for connection, or a way to numb overwhelming feelings. Cognitive dissonance is huge here too. People often use defense mechanisms to reduce the conflict between their actions and their values. The key idea is that it can be a misguided attempt to soothe the pain caused by unresolved paradox.
What about other things like greed or deception?
Greed, that endless wanting, more often comes from deep insecurity. Maybe anxiety, low self-esteem, even trying to push away thoughts of emptiness or death. It can drive unhealthy behaviors and cause a lot of stress. Deception, lying, that's a common social tactic, often used to get status or power. Some personality types are more prone to it. Both greed and deception cause immense suffering. And social paradoxes often involve tricky signaling, which might require some level of deception, even self-deception, to hide our real motives. That basic tension between truth and lies is a fundamental paradox in how we interact. The insight is that these behaviors can be distorted ways of seeking security or meaning when faced with paradox.
So they're like flawed strategies for finding comfort in a world full of contradictions.
Exactly. They might offer a quick fix, temporary relief, a false sense of control, but they usually make things worse long-term. Addressing them might mean looking deeper at the underlying existential discomfort and helping people find healthier ways to navigate life's paradoxes. Maybe AI could help identify those unhealthy patterns.
It's pretty amazing how these paradoxes seem to seep into everything, even art and science.
Absolutely. Humanity's wrestling match with paradox isn't just personal or societal. It's deeply embedded in how we create knowledge and meaning through art, through logic and math, through our belief systems. These fields act like mirrors reflecting paradox, but also like arenas where we actively try to grapple with it.
How does art do that? How does it engage with paradox?
Art, in all its forms, gives us this unique space to explore the messy, complex parts of being human, often right by focusing on paradox. Literature is full of it, using paradox to explore complex emotions, ambiguity, life's contradictions.
Any examples?
Sure. Think of Lovelace's line, "Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage." That speaks to inner freedom despite outer limits. Or Orwell's War is Peace from 1984, a stark societal contradiction boiled down to 3 words. Art often deliberately puts ambiguity front and center. The key thing is art gives us this intuitive, emotional way to engage with paradox.
So art doesn't just show us the paradox, it lets us feel it.
Exactly. And art itself is full of paradoxes. A single painting is unique, but it's also part of the category art. It can reveal deep truths while staying mysterious. We analyze it intellectually, but it also hits us emotionally and consciously. It can criticize society, but also offer hope. It's both an idea and a physical thing. It can free our thinking or trap it in ideology. These internal paradoxes are why art is so good at capturing the contradictory nature of life.
What about the more formal areas like logic, math, physics? Do paradoxes trip them up too?
Well, yeah. The quest for perfectly consistent knowledge in those fields has uncovered some really fundamental paradoxes, showing the limits of even those rigorous systems. Gödel's incompleteness theorems are the big ones here.
Remind me about those.
Essentially, Gödel proved that any formal system complex enough to do basic arithmetic can't be both complete, meaning it can prove all its true statements, and consistent, meaning it doesn't contradict itself.
So there will always be true things it can't prove.
Exactly. And it can't even prove its own consistency from within its own rules. It was a massive blow to the idea of creating a perfect, self-contained foundation for math. It showed there's a gap between what's true and what's provable, suggesting maybe human intuition plays a role that formal systems can't capture.
Wow. So even pure logic hits a wall.
Pretty much. And those self-referential paradoxes we talked about earlier, Liar, Russell's Levesque, they also forced major revisions in logic and math foundations. Physics has its own conceptual paradoxes too, like wave-particle duality or the EPR paradox, that challenge our basic understanding of reality.
So even our most precise tools run into these limits. What about our belief systems, myths? How do they handle paradox?
Well, myths and belief systems across cultures and history offer narrative and symbolic ways to grapple with those deep existential paradoxes, meaning suffering, death, freedom. Joseph Campbell's idea of the monomyth, or hero's journey, suggests myths share a basic structure addressing these universal human concerns.
Like a template for dealing with life's big questions.
Sort of, yeah. Campbell thought these stories offer a psychological roadmap for modern life, helping us navigate the tension between being an individual and being part of the human collective. The key insight is that they provide stories to make sense of paradox.
So stories help us find coherence when logic fails.
They can. Theologian Paul Tillich had another take. He saw faith not just as belief in dogma, but as our ultimate concern. He even said doubt is part of real faith. He talked about sin as being estranged from ourselves, from a deeper ground of being we can only approach symbolically. His framework offers a way to find meaning even amidst paradox and uncertainty. And belief systems themselves change over time, often precisely because they encounter contradictions or new information. They get reinterpreted or new stories emerge. Even things like sacred values in society can sometimes mask underlying motives, adding another layer of paradox.
So art, science, belief systems, they're all different ways we try to wrestle with these inherent contradictions.
Exactly. Art uses emotion and intuition. Science and logic use formal systems, but reveal their limits. Belief systems use narrative and symbol for the big existential questions science might not reach. AI could potentially help by analyzing across these domains, maybe even finding new ways to represent or engage with paradox.
But doesn't just trying to represent a paradox change it somehow?
That is a fantastic point. Yes, the very act of representing a paradox in art, language, logic, inevitably simplifies or transforms it. The picture isn't the thing itself, right?
Right.
The representation becomes our main way of grappling with it.
Right.
But it's not the same as the raw paradox. Art highlights some aspects, obscures others. Gödel showed even formal systems have limits on what they can capture. So any explanation, especially from an AI, is a model, an approximation. It's not the lived human experience of it. We need humility about what AI can do. It's a tool to augment our understanding, not provide the final answers.
These paradoxes must have a huge impact on our ethics too, right? Our sense of right and wrong.
Oh, absolutely. The ethical dimension is massive. Paradoxes challenge our moral frameworks, shape our society's rules, and lead to all sorts of cultural responses.
Yeah.
Navigating them often forces really tough ethical choices.
How do they mess with our ideas of right and wrong?
Well, many paradoxes force us to question simple rules. Existential ethics, for example, comes from facing paradoxes like meaninglessness and freedom. If there's no built-in purpose, then we have to create values and take responsibility for them. That's a heavy ethical burden. Then there's the expectation effect in ethics, a paradox, where sometimes doing the conventionally good thing leads to bad results, and vice versa. That really messes with simple ethical systems based only on intentions or rules. Thinkers like Camus or Kierkegaard wrestled with this kind of moral ambiguity. The point is, paradoxes show the limits of easy answers in ethics.
So what seems right can get really complicated really fast.
Exactly. And how we develop moral reasoning can be seen as trying to get better at handling this complexity. Theory suggests we mature from simple rule following towards understanding social contracts and universal principles. Even in faith traditions, being able to hold paradox is often seen as a sign of maturity. Ethics are human-made systems, constantly evolving as we encounter new paradoxes.
What happens when we fail? when we don't navigate these ethical knots well.
That's when things can get really dark. Struggling with the dissonance and anxiety from paradoxes, or when people exploit them, can lead to things like cruelty, dehumanization, moral disengagement.
Moral disengagement, what's that?
It's using mental tricks to act unethically without feeling bad about it. Things like justifying harmful actions for a greater good, using euphemisms to hide the harm, blaming the victim, spreading responsibility so no one feels accountable.
Wow. Ways to rationalize bad behavior.
Basically, yes. Dehumanization is part of it too. Seeing others as less than human makes it easier to hurt them, removes them from our moral concern. There's even a paradox of dehumanization where perpetrators might still recognize some human traits in victims, but treat them as subhuman anyway, possibly to manage their own cognitive dissonance. Understanding these mechanisms helps explain cruelty. The key insight: failing to handle ethical paradox can lead to moral breakdown.
It sounds like society structures, education, law, economics are involved too, either helping or making things worse.
Definitely. These structures can be designed to help us manage paradox, but they can also create or worsen them. Take education. It's meant to help people advance, right? But unequal access can mean the system actually reinforces inequality, a paradox.
Right.
But education can also be designed to teach critical thinking, ambiguity tolerance skills, crucial for navigating paradox. So structures cut both ways.
What about economics and law?
Economics has the paradox of progress growth alongside inequality or environmental damage. There's the paradox of thrift. Everyone saving is bad for the economy overall. People are exploring alternative models to address these. Law constantly bumps up against the free will paradox when assigning responsibility. Sociology looks at how societal paradoxes, like the gap between goals and means, can lead to deviance or innovation. Sometimes things like greed or deception arise as responses. The point is, our systems are deeply intertwined with paradox.
And different cultures probably have different ways of dealing with all this.
For sure. Cultural psychology shows how our minds and cultures shape each other. Different cultural values like individualism versus collectivism likely influence how people approach existential paradoxes around freedom or community. Some cultures might just be more comfortable with ambiguity. Cultural existential psychology looks at how culture filters existential threats, leading to different ways of coping. Even big historical movements like the Enlightenment or postmodernism can be seen as societal responses to paradox. Ultimately, ethical systems evolve as we grapple with paradox. AI might help model these systems across cultures, but again, it can't solve the underlying value conflicts. And often the structures themselves are the source of paradox, needing reform.
Which brings us back to AI. Given how messy and, frankly, illogical these human paradoxes are, how can AI, built on logic, actually help us?
And that is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have to compare what humans do well versus what AI does well right now. Humans have lived experience, intuition, emotion. We feel the weight of paradox, but we're biased, limited.
And AI?
AI crushes massive data sets, spots patterns, stays objective, finds logical flaws efficiently. But it lacks that felt sense, that consciousness, that emotional understanding. That's the fundamental gap.
So AI can crunch the numbers on paradox, but it doesn't get it like we do.
Exactly. It can define paradox based on its training data, but it can't feel the angst of a meaning-of-life paradox or the discomfort of cognitive dissonance. That difference is crucial.
Okay, acknowledging that gap, how can AI realistically help us make sense of this complexity?
Well, its strength in analysis is key. AI could potentially sift through historical data, cultural stories, even social media, to spot early signs of societal paradoxes or track how they evolve.
Like an early warning system.
Maybe. Complexity theory suggests social systems have weird emergent properties, feedback loops. AI might be able to model some of that, showing how different factors interact to create paradoxes. It could also help with cross-cultural analysis. How do different societies handle the same basic paradoxes? The potential is in pattern recognition and modeling complexity at a scale beyond us.
So like a super-powered research assistant for mapping paradoxes.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And it could also become a tool to boost our understanding. Imagine AI educational tools designed specifically to build critical thinking and comfort with ambiguity. Or maybe AI tools that help us recognize our own cognitive dissonance, prompting reflection on conflicting beliefs. For emotional well-being, maybe AI apps offering personalized coaching in managing the stress paradoxes cause, using techniques like cognitive reappraisal or acceptance. It might even help us get better at predicting our own emotional reactions.
Could it even help with the ethical tangles that paradoxes create?
Potentially, as an analytical tool. AI could simulate outcomes of applying different ethical theories to tricky paradoxical situations, like that expectation effect.
See what happens if you follow Rule A versus Rule B.
Something like that. It could also analyze texts for hidden biases or inconsistent reasoning that fuels paradoxes. But, and this is crucial, AI can't resolve value conflicts. It has no moral agency. Its role is analysis and illustration, not making ethical judgments for us.
The person who prompted this deep dive asked specifically about AI helping find a better logic for life and death, those ultimate paradoxes. What about that?
That's such a deeply human question. AI can definitely help by explaining existing logic, philosophical arguments about mortality, different cultural views. It can lay out the landscape of human thought on the topic.
But it can't give the answer.
Exactly. It can't provide the existential comfort or the universally right logic for something so subjective. The need to understand paradox at life's end is personal, emotional, often beyond pure logic. AI can illuminate, but it can't validate or resolve that deep need.
So who really benefits most if we do manage to collaborate effectively with AI on understanding paradoxes?
It can be pretty widespread. Individuals wanting self-understanding, educators teaching critical thinking, policymakers trying to navigate societal contradictions, researchers studying complex systems, ultimately society as a whole, if it helps us live more wisely with these inherent tensions.
Is there a risk, though? A paradox in using AI itself for this?
Oh, definitely. AI isn't neutral here. It can be a paradox amplifier, making us more aware of complexities we hadn't seen. It might be a paradox resolver for some logical knots. But using AI creates new paradoxes about ethics, control, autonomy, bias.
So AI changes the game just by being involved.
Right. Its application is recursive. The goal shouldn't be AI solving paradoxes for us, but AI helping us navigate them while we simultaneously navigate the paradoxes AI itself introduces. That needs strong ethical guidelines and lots of public conversation.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what can we actually do as individuals and societies to get better at living in this paradoxical labyrinth?
Well, individually, a few things stand out. Cultivating ambiguity tolerance, getting more comfortable with uncertainty. Education helps. Parenting that encourages curiosity helps. Boosting emotional intelligence and regulation. Knowing our feelings. Managing them with things like cognitive reappraisal or acceptance. Sharpening critical thinking and metacognition, questioning assumptions. Thinking about our thinking. Practices like mindfulness can help us just sit with tension without reacting immediately. And developing the personal philosophy, stoicism, existentialism, whatever works, can provide a framework.
What about bigger societal changes?
We need educational reforms that teach these skills explicitly, fostering adaptive belief systems, stories, and worldviews that embrace complexity and help us make meaning. Pushing for ethical AI development, transparency, accountability, oversight are key. And continuing to reform economic and social structures to tackle those built-in paradoxes like inequality.
And it feels like just connecting with other people must be important too.
Hugely important. Shared understanding. Talking about these struggles in communities, it helps us feel less alone. And empathy is vital. It's the antidote to the dehumanization that can happen when we fail to handle paradox well.
So what's the final takeaway here? How do we navigate this?
I think it's about embracing uncertainty. We can't eliminate paradox. Maybe our unique human ability is finding meaning despite contradiction. Resilience isn't just bouncing back, it's learning to navigate and grow within paradox. That means cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, building frameworks of meaning that can handle complexity. AI might help personalize resilience training, shifting the focus from solving paradox to empowering our human ability to thrive within it.
Okay, so it really sounds like these human-made paradoxes aren't going anywhere. They're just part of the deal of being human. Challenging, yes, but also maybe what pushes us to grow.
Exactly. They are fundamental, enduring catalysts. And AI, it's a potentially powerful tool to help us understand them better through analysis and modeling. But we always have to remember its limits, especially when it comes to subjective experience and values.
It definitely feels like the future involves some kind of human-AI teamwork in navigating all this. But we need to be really careful, ethical, and focused on empowering people, not just finding tech solutions.
Completely agree. The goal isn't getting rid of paradox. Maybe that's impossible anyway. It's about enhancing our ability to live meaningful, resilient lives right in the middle of it all.
All right, here's a final thought to leave you with. Maybe our ability to not just solve, but to actually live with paradox, to find meaning right there in the contradictions. And maybe that's what truly defines being human. And maybe the ongoing exploration itself is what makes life this continuous, evolving deep dive.
This is DigitView.